Thank you very much for the invitation. Je m'excuse, la présentation va être en anglais, pas en français, parce que le travail, c'est en anglais. Et pour discuter avec les personnes avant moi, je pense que l'anglais, c'est le latin dans la période médiévale. So, thanks for the invitation right now. What I'm going to present today is a work that I've been carried out with a series of colleagues, Cornelia Lawson, Anna Fernandez Zubieta, Rodrigo Cataishi, Emanuel Toselli. Is the first output, hopefully, of a longer project. There has been behind a long data collection and cleaning up, so it's a project that started about 3-4 years ago with funding from one institution, funding from the other institution with some mobility. So exactly a bit the story we heard before, hopefully in positive terms. I have two affiliations because in Italy the situation gets more and more complex. So I'm at the head of the department, but then there is the local foundation supporting a college, and therefore some people do their research there, and so I just get one salary but two affiliations. Okay, so let me introduce you briefly to the presentation of today. I will spend a few minutes, but very shortly, on a framework. Some of the discussion fundamentally is this is a first paper, and I try to argue that if you're interested in studying mobility, there are certain specific kind of mobility that is better to study rather than other. If you're interested in the performance, in the productivity impact of mobility. Then I briefly introduced the 3 research questions. I spent some time on the subject, that is biosciences, and we'll explain you what is happening in the UK and the US. Then the database we built, and I will conclude with briefly the econometric strategy and results. This is a preliminary work. I mean, it's a paper of publishing a book, but I would say that it's an ongoing project, probably without an end, in the sense that you can always improve econometric models. This is a first cut to try to give you some evidence concerning the 3 research questions. Okay, so how do we go? This paper and sets in a broader research project I've been carrying on the last 10 years, fundamentally in understanding mobility and the relation between mobility and research performance. The presentation of today will focus on international mobility and tries to understand, provide some evidence if there is a positive relationship between international mobility and research performance. So what we have seen in the previous data, I think the long-term trend in co-publication is also driven by mobility. And of course, mobility is driven by reduction in cost of traveling and reduction in cost of interactions, internet fundamentally. It makes interaction much easier, and therefore you have more international collaboration, you have more mobility, and you have more publications. So the setup of this research is within the broader literature of migrants. Migration flows, and specifically we look at researcher as knowledge migrant. So the idea here is that, yes, they may have a lot of other reasons, but we think that the major reason for explaining migrations of mobility of researchers across country is research related. Fundamentally, researchers are moving to find a better suited research environment, and then they also teach. So here we fundamentally focus on a sample of scientists in university that are doing teaching, and therefore the principal motive is to find a better environment to carry out research. Of course, there is in sociology especially a large literature on returnees, and returnees are mainly explained through other reasons, among which family-related reasons are extremely important. So when you have to look at mobility, you really have to look at 2 types of mobility, outward mobility and return mobility, with different explanations. Second important observation is self-selection. There is a large literature providing evidence of self-selection of migrants in general, and there is a small literature, but consistent with these results for researchers that tells us that fundamentally are the most skilled, whatever skilled means, of higher quality, whatever high quality means, that tend to move. Fundamentally, mobility is always associated to cost. You go in another country, another language, another culture, and therefore the idea here is that you have to think to be quite good to be successful in a different setup. and therefore is a self-selection of the ones that are of better potential that will tend to move. And therefore, in the econometric modeling, there is a problem of self-selection of the mobility, and I didn't deal with this in the current model. The third part of the framework, as I said very quickly, is the matching idea. The matching idea is that how do I understand or why I should have a positive correlation between mobility and productivity. I should have a positive correlation between mobility and productivity because the performance of the researcher in the previous institution was limited by the mismatch between the characteristics of the individual and the institution. So I do see better performance because there is the match between the researcher and the new institution is better, and therefore the researcher can perform at a higher level, but was already present, this capacity of performance, but was not reachable in the previous setup. Of course, the simplest explanation of this, you have more capital. I mean, we are thinking about natural sciences. Sociologists and scientists, for me, are not real scientists. So when I speak about scientists, I really think about the laboratory setup with equipment, and therefore one explanation, a very simple explanation, you move in a place where it's more endowed of capital, and therefore you can be more performant. You simply take two individuals, same characteristics, same everything, and you put them into different laboratory with one higher capital, automatically the second individual will get a higher probability, higher productivity. Okay, so this is a bit the setup of this analysis. The argument I pushed forward today is that you can study mobility at various levels of the scientific career. The more you move towards a tenure and in a tenure position, the more information you have. Fundamentally, studying mobility at the early phase of education part of the career, typically the PhD period, is very difficult because we have less information both for the individual that is choosing where to go. Think about an Italian going to the US, a Chinese going to Germany. Which is the institution I'm going to pick up to do my PhD? I don't really know. I ask to my local boss. And my local boss doesn't know, and we'll have a network of information. Yes, we have ranking, but we know the problems of ranking. So yes, there is a bit more information out there in the world, but fundamentally it's very much mediated by the social network of the local supervisor. That's to say that there is very little information. Put yourself on the other side, the hiring or the person that is going to take a PhD in the laboratory. Again, think about the laboratory. Don't think about ourselves. I mean, PhDs are part of the laboratory, are young researchers. So I'm picking up someone that is going to come and work with me, and therefore I have to choose this person, but I have very, very little knowledge. I only have the knowledge about previous education. The situation is kind of different once you move at the postdoc level because you, in sciences, tend to publish during the PhD. So I start to have publication as a vector of knowledge, of information, and therefore they're telling me about the quality of the researcher, and the match can be better. So I'm suggesting, this is a broad representation, I don't have time today to explain, that is very, very difficult to study educational mobility. I think that you can really try to study mobility after the PhD as a very, very clear cut. If you're interested in final productivity, you have a first phase that is postdoc, so it's temporary. You have a second phase there that is tenure track, and then I will try to tell you later on how we try to capture this. And finally, you have a job transition, job once you are tenure, and the information is much more available. Of course, there are various types of mobility: educational, job, geographical, social, disciplinary, occupational mobility. All this is intertwined in the analysis of mobility. You can have an international mobility that is a change of job in a tenure track, across country, with a promotion, with change of job. 5 types of mobility in one. And you might be interested in studying all of them. In this paper, we just take a very simple shot at this. We take the postdoc, and we look at the postdoc going and coming back from the US as our main core of analysis. So it's geographical mobility at the postdoctoral level. Okay, so as I said, we focus on postdoc career step. We look at foreign postdoc. We know that there is a phenomenon of internationalization, particularly strong. The data you showed confirms this, particularly strong in the biomedical field, so it's a particularly interesting field to study because there is evidence there. Going to a leading, I will try to convince the UK and the US are the leading countries in this area, and then staying or returning, where returning here means going back to the UK. All right, so research question, or what we try to start to analyze. So the first one is for the complete sample, I will explain you later on, is having a postdoc is associated to a better performance. There is a large sociological and some economic literature about the impact of postdoc. Positive, you learn the culture of publishing, you interact, you create network. Negative, more postdoc, longer term in postdoc, is a place to temporary unemployment, then you ended up in to go outside academia. So there are different views, though there is a bit more evidence on the positive effect, and maybe, actually it's not maybe, and this is changing depending on the country, because postdoc have been used in different way in different countries in different time. More often in the US and in the UK, increasingly so in Germany, Japan, and other countries. So there is a dynamic in the postdoc market, if you want. So first at the level of postdoc, UK, US versus other countries. We identify a series of other countries where the scientists did the postdoc, and then we try to capture a bit more. I can do a postdoc wherever, or I can do a postdoc in the top institution. So we try to get some ranking in the terms, some reputation in this analysis. Then we analyze two subsamples. We take the returnees, so UK educated, PhD level, went to the US to do a postdoc, and then returned and work in the UK. So and we ask, are the returnees performing better than those researchers that were educated in the UK and did a postdoc in the UK? And then a researcher with a US postdoc have a higher productivity if they stay in the US. We focus on the sample of all the population of US postdoc. I will explain later on my data, and then try to understand if those that stayed in the US perform better than those that moved out. So to give you the idea here is an attempt, and there are a lot of data limitations, though it took me 5 years to build up this database, to dig out some information of this interesting, I think, flow of people going and coming back between the UK and the US. Okay, why biosciences? Why this is an interesting field? It's an interesting field because it's a growing field, fundamentally. It's very, very fascinating. If you take macro data about founding, just to start, you look till the late 60s, early 70s was physics, and then the bioscience, biomedical. Here, attention, we work on bioscience. We try to push out health and medical research for comparability reasons. So we try to work on bioscience. US number of PhD triple in the period 78 to 2008. In the UK, there are no data for such a long period, but increase of 40% in the 2000, from 2000 to 2012. US postdoc triple again between 1980 and 2010. No statistical evidence for the UK, but anecdotal evidence of a huge increase in the postdoc. So increase in the PhD, increase in the postdoc population. A second important factor for our analysis is a foreign PhD, postdoc, and less so academic staff. So there is an overall trend in internationalization in this population. In the US, 40% increase in foreign postdoc in the period 85-2009. Fundamentally, you see the arrival of Indians, Chinese, and other Europeans in the US, and some Canadians. In the UK, especially important growth in the number of foreign PhDs, EUs and non-EUs. It's quite important to understand that the UK is Commonwealth. Okay, the UK is still, the empire is still important to understand the UK. So when you study the UK, you really need to take into account Commonwealth country because they have a special relationship. Easiness of visa, period of visiting is completely different compared to other countries. So EU and non-EU where especially Commonwealth are there. And in the UK, 31% of academic staff in biomed was foreign origin and 50% of the postdoc in 2012-2013. So here two important claim I'm putting forward. One is the growing field. medical health related also, but is the one next door. And second is the field in which, consistent with the data we saw before, internationalization is really important. So interesting to study for us. Okay, how do we go and study? We build up this database called bioscience database. It's extremely important to understand what is our unit of analysis. It's not the generic academics, but we focus on what we define research active academics. What does it mean, research active academics? It means that they have to have been granted at least one project funding. Two sources, BBSRC, Biological and Bioscience Research Council in the UK, and NIH in the US. So we are not claiming to be representative for the academic population in total, but only for those researchers that are, by definition, researchers, so they are active in research. And the definition of active research, we took the period, I guess 2000, 2010, I didn't check before this presentation, 10 years and look for the population of grantees. So out of this population of grantees, to give you an idea, some 10,000 in the US and about 7,000 in the UK. We started from this population and then we went out to look for them. And what we tried to gather is CV informations. CV information means we collected the CVs. We went on the web, we collected CVs, we excluded medical doctors because they have a completely different career, and that is the decision of why to limit, to exclude health and really the medical part, because the career is completely different, is institutionally bound, the US is different from the UK, so out the doctor, and we paid a lot of attention to take them out. The collection of CV has been done partially manually. Partially, we develop a software called CSUB that automatically goes on the web, crawls the web, gathers information, and I have to admit is not completely successful, starts to codify. The major problem with CV analysis is actually the codification. Not only the time, but the problem of standardization on how you codify exactly. There is a lot of learning by doing, and it's field specific, and that's the craziest thing. You can become a very good codifier for physics and chemistry. I did a paper before in physics and chemistry. Then you move to a new field and you say, whoa, what is this? I don't know anything any longer. So we try to develop a software. It's working, it's open software out there, and of course we like people to use it. Okay, what do we have? The database keeps on growing. For this paper, we have about 600 researchers. We did some exclusions, so if you want, I can tell you later on. Fundamentally, they're picking up people from 1956 to 2012 as a career. So of course, it's a non-balanced panel. They enter in our sample. We have demographic, career, mobility, publication, and citation. So we try to be as detailed as possible. We claim in the paper that is sufficiently representative. I know that in statistics you shouldn't use that word, but it depends on which variable you look. So we started from 10,000, about 7,000 and 10,000, and we really have 300 and 400. So we look for as many characteristics as possible in our sample and in the regional population, and we try to check if they were representatives. For example, gender, year of first grant, amount of the first grant, university, scientific area, affiliation, rank. So we did a quite thorough analysis. I'm not saying that along all these variables they are representative, but I would say that 80–90% of the variables are our sample is representative of the population. I'm short in this, but it's not that the data existed. The data is grant information for the population. You have to collect data for the population. For example, we match in the UK the data of the BBSRC with the data of the research assessment exercise for 15 years. So that we were able to match the total population of academic in the UK to our sample and to gather individual information and then look at our sample. So there has been a quite significant effort to create information for the original population, because the original population was simply telling me a name, an amount, a year, and the name of a grant. And from there, we have to reconstruct the information starting from original population being the complete world of scientists in the university. So to give you some idea, what I'm trying to convince you now is that the two samples are not very different. fundamentally, at least this is my view, Europeans look at the US as top, high mobility, high productivity, high everything. Yes, possibly, but the UK is not so different from, especially in this field. And I'm trying to convince you that it's not so different, at least in our sample for what we are representative, that it's not so different in terms of mobility. I think we have a really misleading perception of how mobile is the US. And here I'm trying to claim that the mobility level in the two countries is not different. So first part, I don't have time to go through this in very detail. But if you look at the 3 years, I mean, there are some differences. You see the mean different variable there. But once you look at the 3 years period, if you want to a cohort of 3 years, this sample, UK, US, is female, age, country of birth, BA, PhD, year, and start of the career is more or less similar. So the two sample in basic demographic are, you see differences there because we did the test at the year level, but once you do at the 3 years level, you don't have any problem any longer. Postdoc, we have about 84% in the UK, 80% in the US, so the postdoc is very, very, very common, so almost the totality, 80%. Of course, there is age bias. The more you go in the past, the less common is the postdoc. Postdoc in the UK, 64%. 4% went to do the postdoc in the US. Postdoc in the UK sample, but did in the US 26%. So we do have quite some mobility of people that went to the US to do the postdoc and then went back to the UK for their career, 74% in the US. And then 19 and 7%, the 19% simply is a French postdoc, an Italian postdoc, a South African postdoc, an Australian, a Canadian postdoc that then ended up in the UK to work, compared to very little in the case of the US. So fundamentally in the US, if you're a foreigner, you go there to do the PhD or the postdoc. Is very rare, 7%, that you do the postdoc in another country, then you end up in the US. Pay attention, increasingly there are multiple postdocs. So something like 64 in our sample did 2 or even 3 postdoc in one country or more than a country. So it's a very internationalized sample, this, and there are various postdocs. So to summarize, 70% born in the US or in the UK, 80% studied in the two countries. The US is a bit more international at the BA level. UK is a bit more international at the PhD level, where in this case gets the impact of the of Europe compared to the UK and Commonwealth. So 84% UK and 80% with at least one postdoc. So more international postdoc in the UK sample especially. Then we look, and I move on to academic labor market. I don't want you to read this table. I want you just to believe me. What we try to do here is we look at a lot of various alternative specification of mobility. Starting from the first one is job mobile. For us, job mobile, it means you have a tenure position, because on the CV we were able to identify clearly tenure, and you move to another position. So it's a decision to move, and then we went down times to move. International mobility, cross-border, international mobility, okay, the UK can't be compared to the US, so we take EU, and we do international mobility EU as one, international mobility UK, and so on and so forth. Industrial mobility, sector mobility, PROs. Yes, Europe is still different from the US. PROs are still important in Europe, so you see more mobility from university to PROs in the UK compared to the US. Then we look specifically to the mobility among universities, and we look at higher education mobility. 40% in the UK had at least one change of job, and 42% in the US. So the US is slightly more, but not significantly different. Look at the problem institutional voluntary mobility, forced mobility. The two career systems are different. In the UK, once you are a lecturer, after 3 years period, you are fundamentally in a permanent, it's not called tenure, it's called permanent contract, so you are kind of permanent. In the US, till when you get the tenure, till when you get an associate professor, you are in a temporary position. So if you look at voluntary and forced mobility, is different, but once you look at assistant or associate as above, becomes again similar. So here the idea is, for cross-country reasons, to solve the problem, you take everything that is associated and more as permanent, and everything that is under the associate level as permanent. And then the comparison becomes possible, and again, those are not any longer significant. So when you look at the labor market for scientists, it seems that the UK has developed a market that is as mobile as the UK market. And then we went through a bit of more detailed information where we try to pick up fundamentally the European effect and the Commonwealth effect in mobility within institutions. If you want, you may want to look at the UK as the California of the EU, in the sense that there are a lot of French, German, Dutch, Italian that end up to work on the UK market, much more than in all other European countries. So what I'm telling you about the UK is only for the UK. It would not apply at all to Italy, France, Germany, or other European countries, not even Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands, where internationalization is higher. Okay, so basic evidence. Two samples are comparable. The UK academic labor market characteristics are similar to the US in terms of mobility and type of mobility. Okay, what do we measure? We want to measure productivity in some way or another, so we use publication, that is the usual indication. Here there is, in the case of biosciences, a useful tool, publication harvester by Azule and other, that is using Medline and helps to the download and the cleaning up of the data. We went through the usual disambiguation problem, who's John Smith is the John Smith that I want to pick up or not? And we ended up to clean quite sufficiently English names. We surrendered in front of Asian names, and we simply dump them and leave it there for the next effort. So we went down to 512. On this paper, rather than running the risk of misallocating the names, we went for the more radical approach. We matched to journal citation report. So of course, not all journals were in the journal citation report. And then we got the journal impact factor. So the average journal impact factor of all articles published in 1 year. And finally, you might want to be interested, we heard it before, in the top performer. And so we look at top 5% number of top articles. So if you want, we really have a quantity measure, number of publications, a quality impact-based measure, average impact factor, with all the limitation that we know there are on the impact factor, but is what we best have. And then finally, we have the top performer and top articles. This is on 20 years' time. So we use all the journals in these 20 years so to build up the panel. Okay, so some number. Up there in the first figure, you see all publication. You don't see much difference between the US and the UK. Then you look at the quarter-weighted publications, and you start to see slightly more performance in the US. The econometric model, we then use various measures of publication, but the results never change. So at the end, we use simply publication count. Fundamentally, we find very little for whatever configuration. Top impact journal, you start the gap opening. So it seems that the US is more performant than the UK for top impact journal. And finally, average journal impact factor, where the gap is open, but it's particularly open in the first period, and then there is a catching up. So the story here is, in these 20 years, if you measure in terms of quantity, there is not much difference. And there are a lot of other data and papers convincing the reader that these are the two countries in which bioscience research is at the top in terms of publication. But then once you go and look at some form of impact or of quality, you start to see a difference, though is a reducing gap. So it seems that the UK is moving nearer to the US. So, okay, so that was the output. The analysis, I told you I want to bring in some reputation, some quality at the level of institution, and then we had to build the rankings. We know rankings are problematic, though we have to. In the US, there are no institutional rankings, but there is the NRC doctoral program evaluation, and actually this is the only paper that puts together the 3 available data sources. We spent quite some time. In 1982, we had the photocopy of the paper copy, and we copied ourselves. So it's 1982, 1993, and 2005. are 3 points in time. There is nothing better than this. And we look at the top 10% institution in these rankings. For the UK, we could be much more sophisticated because we had all UK publication clean. We bought this data a few years ago by Web of Knowledge at the institutional level. In the UK, there is a market out there for data about publications. These data are quite reliable. And then we use an indicator that is the impact-weighted productivity that tries to take into account at the departmental level, at the institutional level, for every year, a combination of publication and citation so that we can try to rank institutions. And then we did the top again, top 10%. For the period, some of our scientists starts in 1956. However, then we limit it to 1980. For the before 85 or after 94, we take the last year of the ranking. So this allows us to rank department within the area of bioscience in the two countries. Okay, so what do we do at the econometric level? Very quickly in the identification, there are a lot of problems. Of course, whenever you start to do this kind of models, you have endogeneity. You would like to have a natural experiment. Okay, we don't have anything of that. This is a first go to look at the data and find some correlation. We did as much as we could to control for the endogeneity problem, fundamentally excluding as many variables as possible that were endogenous. We go on a Poisson regression. We control for age, gender, PhD country, co-PI, because a PI, a co-PI, so it's important because co-PI is usually younger, so it picks up some of the heterogeneity of the role. Institutional type, I showed you that we have PROs, university, and companies. My career can be sometimes in the university, then I go to the company, then I come back to the university. We have these cases, so I need to take that into account concerning my productivity. And then we included other variable but were endogenous, and we excluded from the model that we present today. Again, the model is always repeated for 3 performance variables: total number, so quantity, number of top journals, the super top, and this average impact. The average impact, it says the average quality of your publication, trying to approximate the quality effect. We always put some individual institutional control, not shown in the following slides. We put in is an unbalanced panel, year and career start effect. Of course, there is a difference if you start your career in 1960 or in 2005. And so we do a fixed effect model for year and career start. We test robustness of these doing the start of the PhD, doing the first grant, doing a lot of other possible starting of career, fixed effect, and they were always robust. And then we cluster robust results. So conclusions in the next 5 minutes. First, this is the complete sample. So you have in both UK and the US. Here, fundamentally, you want to see if there is a US premium that we saw in the descriptive statistics. Are the researchers in the US performing more in terms of quantity, top journals, average quality? It seems so. Okay, we have a significant. So there seems to be a US premium. Second effect, we look at the postdoc. We have US postdoc, UK postdoc, or other postdoc. So having done a US postdoc, having done a UK postdoc, or having done a postdoc in another country as an effect. Yes, it has an effect, but there is no difference among the 3. So effect is positive to have, or positive is, there is a positive correlation between the postdoc and the average journal impact factor. Pay attention, because most of the story I'm going to tell you is on the average journal impact factor, rather than, if you want, we have 2 quality measure and 1 quantity measure. So the postdoc seems to tell me only in that, because then in the last conclusion I will try to bring in some sociological analysis of why that can happen. Then, what do we see else here? We see that if you go to top institutions, so postdoc in top US institution has higher journal impact factor, significant and strong. We do some top UK postdoc, fundamentally Cambridge and Oxford, they are. In terms, not only, there are 5 or 6 top institutions in the UK, in terms of number of top journals. And then that was the interesting results. Maybe driven also by the fact that we excluded Asian names that may have come in at the postdoctoral level, we do find a weak but always significant effect, negative correlation of having done the PhD in the US. Okay, this model has a lot of problems fundamentally, because there is no control for heterogeneity, no control for selection, no. So to try to solve a bit the problem, we went to a difference in difference kind of setup. So we take the sample of researcher working in the UK with a UK or a US postdoc. We exclude academic that did their postdoc in the US but work in the UK. So just to be sure that they did their PhD, just to be sure that we don't have a US PhD effect, but we really work on the US postdoc effect. We do a simple different. So is there a US postdoc premium in the UK market fundamentally? What are the results? If we look at the US postdoc, doesn't have any effect on publication number, doesn't have any effect on top journal. He has a weak effect on average journal impact factor. This is whatever US postdoc. And then once you go and have a look to the top US postdoc, then you have a strong, significant effect in average journal impact factor. So this tells you that you went to the US to do your postdoc in a top institution, then you go back to the UK for your career, and you tend to publish on average, in higher impact factor journal compared to your similarity test. I mean, the sample is reduced, but similar in the UK. Finally, again, trying to solve the problem of selection indigeneity, we go do another difference in difference. We take a sample of researcher with US postdocs. So this is all the researcher with a US postdoc being at work in the US and then in the UK. And so we control for US PhD as a possible effector. And here the question we try to address is the US able to keep the most talented researcher, meaning I did my training in Italy, I go to do my postdoc in the US, and then I stay in the US rather than going back to Italy. So we look at exactly the complementary sample compared to the previous one. What are the results? Again, we find a strong US premium here in all the variables, publication number in top journals, and average journal impact factor. So staying in the US seems to be a wise career decision for the researchers. However, we also find a correlation between US PhD and US job that tells us, if you look at the difference, is a bit weak of that coefficient with the first coefficient that was positive, that if you had a US PhD and then a US job, you tend to have lower average journal impact factor compared to the one that moved out. So we find the first US level effect, the second level effect of the US through the PhD. There is somehow a message here some evidence that is correlating negatively doing the PhD in the US and then continuing also the career in the US. Okay, conclusion. I use my time. Postdoc, job mobility, international experience are common in both markets. So fundamentally, the UK is as mobile as the US in this specific area of analysis. So the two countries are comparable, first of all. Some of these may be due to the introduction of the research assessment. What the previous speaker was talking about is known as the cow markets. And this was common in the middle 90s, early 2000. Then the regulation on the research assessment have been changed, and now you cannot submit any longer if you're 25%, exactly because created an artificial labor market. But definitely the research assessment had an institutional impact in which concentration of resources in a subset of institutions in the UK meant increased mobility. Fundamentally, you concentrate the resources moving people. It's not you give money and then the money moves people. There has been a narrowing of the impact quality gap, but researchers in the US still have a performance premium. In all the model in which I test this is still there strongly and significant. So fundamentally, working in the US is positive. There is a positive correlation between performance and having a postdoc, especially in top department. If you really, the message there is the top department, US top department that brings most of the facts. The US postdoc premium, especially in terms of impact factor and top department, is transferable to the UK. And it is quite interesting, I think, as preliminary results. So the possibility of bringing back part of the social information network that you got during the postdoc period. So doing a US postdoc and stay to work there is correlated with higher performance. However, doing a PhD and a postdoc in the US is correlated negatively with subsequent quality-adjusted performance. So what these numbers are telling you is fundamentally possibly a story of the postdoc in top institution as a forming period for the scientists, those that are moving back, and pay attention not on the top, but on the average quality. So here you have a negative and a positive interpretation. I couldn't test this. It's just the evidence tells me. If you are formed to publish more in journals of higher average quality. That is a social approach to publication. What we heard before, I'm going to publish only in Nature. I'm not going to publish in the other journals. So there is a specific training in the US that brings the postdoc during the postdoc period, not during the PhD, during the postdoc period. Again, remember what I told you at the start, they start to publish during the postdoc, is when their publication culture is formed that brings you a positive effect in terms of impact factor. You stay in the US or you move to the UK. However, when you look at those that stay in the US, you have a second effect that is probably institutional. More editors of journal, capital, more funding per researcher. There are a lot of other explanations that could justify this differential of performance. Okay, ongoing future work is always good to do future work. And the database now, and hopefully I will stop there, is 800 CVs. So we got 300 more in the last year. CSOB is working well. And then what also, because Jacques presented that, is in the line with that kind of research, we spent a lot of time last year to collect family information, and most importantly, the year of birth of children. So for 400 researchers, we know if and when their children were born, because there is evidence out there in the literature of the correlation between mobility and children, and therefore we could start to instrument the model using that information. And most importantly, we spend a lot of time to really ask directly. I'm phoning people, convincing them to give me the information if they don't have children. So if you want strategic decision of not having children, maybe to have a career. So these are the questions of the gender paper that we will start to do. Some other research, of course, a bit of advertisement and marketing, the last slides. Some other preliminary research was published in this edited book I finished last autumn, in which I have a series of papers by me and other researcher, but then other individual papers by other researcher. And it does cover a few countries, and the focus was squarely on trying to understand more international mobility of researchers. Thank you.